Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to confront and challenge the deep-seated myths and fears of a warrior species? Let's get into the story. The air in the dimly lit cantina hung heavy with the smell of recycled oxygen and stale sweat. Qintari, a seasoned Qintari warrior, ignored the raucous chatter of the various species around him. He had no use for camaraderie in such seedy corners of the galaxy. His focus was solely on the information broker, that slimy, eight-legged Drexian in the far corner. The Drexian held the key to his prey, a human smuggler who dared operate within contested Qintari territory. The legends of humans were woven into every young Qintari warrior's nightmares. Grotesque beasts fueled by bloodlust tearing through planets, mandibles dripping with the gore of 1,000 civilizations. Their reputation alone was a formidable weapon, yet Qintari had vowed to see the destruction of this specific human, a symbol of defiance that festered on the fringe of their vast empire. Movement near the entrance drew his attention. A figure waded through the throng, the dim light catching on skin. The Qintari's secondary eyelids blinked in confusion. The figure was undeniably human. Female from what he could see, but vastly different from the horrific descriptions he'd internalized. Where he expected jagged, skeletal features, there were smooth curves. Instead of yellow, carnivorous eyes, hers held a soft brown hue with flecks of gold he could never have imagined on such a creature. It was her lack of monstrous teeth that shocked him the most. Small, even, and startlingly white, they were exposed in a smile? It was directed at a hulking Grishnok trader passing by. The Grishnok, a species notorious for its quick temper, actually lumbered out of her way with a rumble of apology. The transaction with the Drexian concluded swiftly, information codes flashing across the datapad the human now cradled like any other sentient being in the galaxy. Qintari found his movements uncharacteristically sluggish as he trailed her. She couldn't be real. It had to be a deception, a new form of human warfare his strategist hadn't anticipated. Sarah was acutely aware of the eyes tracking her movements. It was the same on every station, the stares boring into her with a mix of awe and revulsion. She'd learned to navigate the spectrum of reactions long ago. At best, she was treated like a delicate curiosity, to be observed but not approached. At worst, there was outright hostility, whispered accusations of monster barely concealed. Today, however, there was an intensity to the scrutiny that sent a shiver down her spine. She turned subtly, scanning the crowd and locking eyes with a Qintari. The shock was mutual. He stood at least 8 feet tall, his obsidian exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh cantina lights. His multiple eyes glittered with a mixture of fear and fascination. Such raw emotion was incredibly rare for the notoriously stoic Qintari. Before she could break the stare, he looked away, but the sense of being watched persisted as she made her way towards the docking bay, where her ship, the Firefly, was already preparing for departure. Qintari couldn't shake the image of the human female. Her movements lacked the ferocity he'd been trained to expect. There was a grace to her steps, her form strangely appealing, unlike the harsh, angular physique that usually marked their foes. Even the way she carried that datapad, a flicker of concern pinching her brows, seemed undeniably gentle. Anger spiked through him. Had his people been deceived all this time? Were human females designed differently, a trick to lull their enemies into underestimating them? That small, white-toothed smile haunted him. A smile was no weapon, was it? He decided. Tracking this specific human was paramount now. Whatever trickery the humans employed, he would expose it. His superiors would be pleased, and order would be restored to the fractured edge of the Qintari Empire. Qintari entered the docking bay, his sharp eyes finding a sleek, mid-sized freighter. It was surprisingly well-maintained for a human vessel, perhaps one of their more recent conquests. "That one's mine," he rasped out to a bewildered-looking Zabrak docking officer. "Prepare it for immediate departure." The jump into hyperspace was anything but smooth. Sarah cursed, wincing as the Firefly bucked and groaned around her. "Cheap hyperdrive," she muttered under her breath, tapping furiously at her battered control panel. At least it was working, most of the time. That was all she could ask for, out here in the fringes. A proximity alarm startled her out of her work. Another ship was tracking them, too big to be a pirate, and the profile was all wrong for any of the usual patrols out this far. Her unease grew as the ship matched her every evasive maneuver. There was an intelligence behind the pursuit, a chilling tactical mind that made her regret not upgrading the Firefly's scanners sooner. Her fingers flew across the keys, pulling up historical data on any known warships in the area. The results left her heart pounding. The only vessel that matched the readings was a Qintari battlecruiser, a terrifying behemoth capable of leveling small outposts on its own. Why would such a powerhouse be chasing a lone human smuggler? Unless, had her run-ins with their border patrols finally caught up to her? Was she important enough to warrant this level of attention? Sarah gripped the control yoke tightly. She was fast, but she'd never outmaneuver that monstrosity in open space. She needed a different tactic. Fast. Qintari gritted his mandibles in frustration. The human ship was nimble, infuriatingly so. The Firefly had no known weaponry. Why was she running? Surely she understood the futility of a chase. There were no habitable planets within a 2-day jump. She was either foolish in the extreme, or she had a plan. He refused to believe a creature as reputedly dim-witted as a human could outsmart him. Yet, the way she evaded, the strange bursts of energy her ship sporadically emitted, made him uneasy. A plan materialized, its ruthlessness chilling even him. The asteroid field looming on the long-range scanners was notoriously dangerous and unpredictable. Qintari signaled for the cruiser to increase speed, pushing it far past safe parameters. His human quarry would be forced to enter the field if she wanted any chance of survival. And inside that dense labyrinth of rock and ice, his ship's sheer size would be his advantage. The asteroid field loomed on the Firefly's view screen like a monstrous, snarling beast. Sarah knew this was bad. Really, really bad. Desperate times called for desperate measures. With trembling hands, she switched off the automatic piloting, gripping the control yoke in a white-knuckle grip. "All right, Firefly," she murmured, the ship's old console creaking as if in response. "Let's see what you're really made of." She gunned the engines, sending the ship diving straight into the belly of the beast. The alarms screamed, but her heart hammered louder, a strange blend of terror and adrenaline coursing through her veins. This wasn't some standardized trade route. This was pure survival, the kind of flying her father had drilled into her since she was old enough to reach the pedals. Qintari watched, his multiple eyes narrowed as the Firefly disappeared into the maze of asteroids. The human was mad. No sane creature would willingly enter that death trap. But then again, weren't the stories about humans filled with their insane disregard for self-preservation? He had his cruiser maintain position on the edge of the field, sensors scanning for any sign of the human ship. His instincts screamed at him to follow, to finish this chase quickly. But caution, drilled into him through years of warfare, won out. The first asteroid impacted the cruiser's shields with a bone-jarring tremor. Debris, thrown astray by the human's reckless flight, became deadly projectiles. Qintari snarled in frustration. His prey had turned his own ship's strength into a weakness. The cruiser, a marvel of engineering designed for open space combat, was too cumbersome to navigate the shifting dangers of the field safely. He ordered his crew to withdraw, to reposition. They would wait the human out. She'd have to emerge eventually. Meanwhile, within the chaotic heart of the asteroid field, Sarah was in a world of her own. The Firefly weaved, dipped, and whirled around the unforgiving rocks. Each near miss sent her pulse skyrocketing, sweat beading on her brow. Yet with every kilometer traversed, a surprising feeling bloomed alongside her terror. Exhilaration. She was dancing with death, and so far she was winning. Time warped and twisted within the relentless asteroid field. For Sarah, it was an agonizing blur of tense maneuvers and frantic system checks. Several smaller asteroids had clipped the Firefly, leaving scorch marks and a worrying rumble in her aft engine. Her only reprieve was the Qintari ship's absence. Had they given up? That seemed unlikely for a species known for their stubborn persistence. The tension left her muscles stiff, her mind racing as she contemplated her next move. She could keep pushing through the field, but eventually her luck would run out. Staying put was equally dangerous, a sitting duck for when the Qintari realized their error. Then, a daring plan began to take shape, one born not just from desperation, but a perverse spark of defiance. She'd never been one to go down without swinging. Patching into the Firefly's antiquated comm system, Sarah dug into the debris that littered her cargo hold, Old ship hulls, broken tech, and the leftover radiation shielding from a long-scrapped reactor. It was a mess, but within it, the potential for a crude yet ingenious trap flickered to life. Qintari paced the cruiser's bridge, his mandibles clicking restlessly. His instincts demanded action, a swift and decisive strike to end this irritating human's game. Yet, logic prevailed. Every report confirmed that venturing further into the field was suicidal, too great a risk for such insignificant prey. Still, an unsettling question gnawed at him. What if the human wasn't fleeing, but merely stalling? His unease solidified into chilling certainty when he received a transmission picked up from the edge of the asteroid field. It was a human distress signal, broadcasting on ancient frequencies rarely monitored by anyone but desperate scavengers. He growled an order, and the cruiser reversed its position, sensors scanning furiously. The human's audacity knew no bounds. Not only had she risked her life in the field, but she also used it as cover to lay a trap. It was a crude strategy, certainly not one expected of those brutal warmongers they'd been trained to fight. Nonetheless, it had been undeniably effective. The image of that soft, smiling human female resurfaced, and he snarled. This was war, not a child's game of hide-and-seek. As he ordered a scouting party to be deployed, Qintari wrestled with a conflicting mix of anger and begrudging respect. This human, this female, was shattering the very foundations his society had taught him, forcing him to acknowledge a capacity for cunning and daring that had no place in their understanding of her species. Sarah leaned back in the Firefly's pilot chair, allowing herself a single shaky breath. Her ruse had worked. At least the first part had. Now, as the Qintari shuttle approached the decoy ship she'd meticulously crafted from salvage wreckage and programmed with that distress signal, all she had to do was wait. It was the hardest part, this forced stillness when all she wanted to do was flee as far and fast as the Firefly's battered hull could take her. But fear mingled with a grim determination. She wasn't about to go down without leaving her mark upon this cold, unforgiving galaxy. The Qintari strike team approached Sarah's fabricated decoy with ruthless efficiency. Their mandibles clicked in silent communication, their armored bodies rippling with barely contained aggression as they prepared to board and eliminate the presumed threat. Qintari monitored the operation from the cruiser's bridge, his instincts screaming that something was amiss. The ship looked too pristine for something left abandoned for any length of time, yet the distress signal was undeniably human. Then, the trap sprang. The derelict vessel exploded in a dazzling burst of light. Radiation signatures, cleverly masked behind the scavenged shielding, now spewed freely. The Qintari shuttle, caught in the blast zone, was thrown off course, alarms blaring within its damaged hull. The strike team's mandibles clicked in a frenzy of shock and pain, their discipline momentarily fracturing. Sarah, positioned at a safe distance within the asteroid field, watched the chaos with a grim sort of satisfaction. Her hands flew across her console, seizing the opportunity to plot a risky course out of the field. The temporary disruption the explosion caused wouldn't last long. She had a very limited window to escape. Every asteroid she dodged, every near miss with an ancient chunk of ice, fueled both a surge of exhilaration and a creeping sense of dread. Was she truly free, or merely on borrowed time till the hunters tracked her down once again? Back on the Qintari cruiser, Qintari snarled. He'd been outplayed. The distress signal, the pristine decoy, all cleverly designed to draw them in before the strike. His initial disbelief at the human's ingenuity transformed into a surge of anger and determination. He ordered a tactical analysis of the radiation emissions, determined to glean any possible insight into his enemy's method. The results stunned him. "Primitive, sir," his tactical officer reported, his voice barely concealing a quiver. "The emission pattern, it matches outdated technology. Designs abandoned centuries ago." Qintari's multiple eyes narrowed. "Archaic," he muttered, his mind whirling. The human female was both cunning and resourceful, utilizing what her people considered scraps to achieve victory. Fear battled with fascination within him. Had they been wrong all along? He made a decision that would have been unthinkable mere hours ago. Open a channel to the human ship. Now. Sarah blinked in astonishment as the Firefly's antiquated comm system sputtered to life. It wasn't an attack signal, but a request for communication. Her heart pounded in her chest. Had her gamble paid off? Or was this the Qintari merely wanting to gloat over their trapped prey? Her hesitation lingered for a moment, but her inherent curiosity and the flicker of hope that this might somehow open a dialogue won out. She cleared her throat. "This is Captain Sarah Lynn of the Firefly. You have something to say?" Her voice was steadier than she felt, with an edge of defiance despite her overwhelming uncertainty. "Captain Lynn," Jantar's voice rasped through the comm system. It was rough, filled with the barely restrained aggression Sarah expected, yet laced with an element that surprised her. Respect. "Your trap was unexpectedly effective and primitive." Sarah let out a sharp breath, half laughter, half relief. "Well, you work with what you have," she countered, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. "Don't see you guys flying around in salvaged wrecks." Silence stretched across the comms. When Jantar spoke again, his voice was less hostile, more thoughtful. "You are different from the descriptions, Captain Lynn. Your actions are not those of the bloodthirsty monster we have been led to believe you are." Sarah hesitated. She'd survived thanks to her skills and a bit of luck, not some inherent desire for war. But she also knew what her species represented to the Qintari, a brutal enemy fueled by chaos and hunger for conquest. To dispel that notion, that was far more dangerous than any physical battle she'd faced. Yet, the seed of defiance within her refused to wither. "We're all monsters to someone, Jantar," she finally replied, deliberately using his name. "Sometimes the real question is, who decided who the monsters were in the first place?" Her words hung heavy in the calm silence. On the cruiser, Jantar stood motionless. He'd begun this operation with certainty. The enemy was known. The objective was clear. Yet with every twist, with every shattered expectation, the lines had blurred. Logic dictated caution, retreat, a return to the old, reliable narratives. Yet, a new feeling stirred within him, a warrior's undeniable acknowledgement of a worthy foe, and even deeper, a chilling suspicion that perhaps the greatest enemy he faced now was the lie his own people had lived by. "Your people waged war upon ours without provocation," he replied slowly, the usual justifications catching in his throat. "The stories, the images." "Stories can be powerful weapons," Sarah countered, "and fear makes us do foolish things. You're chasing legends, Jantar. I'm just one human, not the scourge of your galaxy." Again, a heavy silence, broken this time by the Qintari tactical officer. "Sir, her ship's engines are charging. She's plotting a jump." Jantar closed his eyes briefly. The instinct to attack, to eliminate the problem, pulsed within him. Yet, his warrior sense told him this fight wasn't about a single smuggler anymore. It was about something far greater. "Let her go," he ordered finally, his voice a low rumble. Sarah stared at the flickering comm system in disbelief, then pure relief flooded her. She punched in the jump coordinates and the Firefly lurched forward, escaping the asteroid field and leaving the Qintari cruiser far behind. The galaxy still held dangers, both known and unknown, but for the first time in a long while there was a flicker of hope within her, a foolish, improbable hope that perhaps change wasn't impossible. Maybe understanding, however fragile, could be forged in the cold heart of space, one conversation at a time. Back on the bridge of the Qintari cruiser, turmoil churned within Jantar, a battle more ferocious than any he'd faced on the battlefield. The human had escaped. He could justify it. Tactical retreat, strategic regrouping. Yet, he knew the truth. He had allowed her to leave. The certainty that had fueled his people for centuries now felt flimsy, brittle. "Sir?" His tactical officer's voice was hesitant, breaking his troubled reflection. "Incoming transmission. From High Command." The fear that clenched his gut wasn't for himself, but for the change he knew was coming. He disobeyed orders, let the enemy flee, and initiated contact. There would be accusations, interrogations, perhaps even a dishonorable discharge, but the tales of human viciousness, of endless carnage, they now felt like flimsy propaganda echoed in empty chambers. With a grim calmness he hadn't known he possessed, Jantar stepped forward and activated the transmission. The High Commander's face filled the screen, stern and imposing as ever. "Report!" the commander barked, his voice echoing with authority. "The human vessel escaped, High Commander," Jantar replied, his voice steady. "Initial engagement led to Unexpected developments. Unexpected? The commander's brows furrowed in displeasure. Explain. Gentar carefully chose his words, reporting the human's ingenuity, her utilization of outdated technology, and most importantly, his decision to open a dialogue instead of pursuing immediate destruction. He was prepared for the commander's rage, for the inevitable accusations of treason. But what he wasn't prepared for was the silence that stretched after he finished his report. Gentar, the High Commander finally said, his voice low and measured, you are to return to base immediately. Your report will be analyzed in detail. Dismissed. The transmission cut off, leaving Gentar and his crew enveloped in stunned silence. He had expected fury, punishment, but instead there was a chilling uncertainty. Had he miscalculated so thoroughly? Or had he, a low-ranking Qintari on the fringe of their empire, inadvertently shaken the very foundations of their long-held beliefs? The ship shuddered as it exited hyperspace, the familiar space docks of Qintar, their capital, filling the view screen. Yet, everything felt different. Gentar descended the ramp, not with the certainty of a warrior fulfilling his duty, but with the heavy tread of one who carries the weight of a potential revolution. Sarah's fingers danced over the Firefly's control panel, setting a course far away from the Qintari territories. That encounter could have been the end of her, yet a strange feeling blossomed inside her. Not bravado, but a cautious thread of hope. The galaxy was a colossal place filled with countless species and even more prejudices. One conversation with a single conflicted Qintari wouldn't erase ages of hostility. Been a start, a crack in the relentless war machine her people had been portrayed as. Perhaps, just perhaps, other cracks might follow. Change was rarely a sudden explosion. It was a slow burn, a single flame of defiance passed hand to hand until it grew into a blaze. She couldn't help but grin at the thought. Maybe being a monster wasn't so bad if it meant shattering expectations and carving a new path in the stars. The Firefly limped into dock on Callisto Station, its battered hull a testament to its close call within the asteroid field. It was a place Sarah knew well, a haven for smugglers, mercenaries, and those the mainstream star lanes preferred to forget. It was perfect for disappearing, but that was precisely what she couldn't afford to do now. News traveled fast in places like this. She barely stepped off the ramp before whispers slithered through the station's grimy corridors. That's her, the one the Qintari chased. Eyes followed her, a mix of fear, awe, and a predatory gleam. Before she had a chance to formulate a plan, a figure detached itself from the shadows. He was human, at least in appearance, yet his tailored suit and augmented eyes spoke of wealth and power. Captain Lin, a word? His voice was smooth, practiced, devoid of the usual surprise upon seeing her. He knew. This was no coincidence. Sarah's mind raced. This must be one of the government's agents. But could she trust them? For now, she had no choice. She nodded curtly. The man gestured towards a secluded booth tucked away in a dimly lit bar. The moment they settled in, sealed from prying eyes, he laid his cards on the table. You've caused quite a stir, Captain, he began. That encounter with the Qintari, well, it's opened some intriguing possibilities. He paused, the glint in his augmented eyes intensifying. The Federation has taken an interest. Sarah narrowed her eyes. The Federation, the sprawling, ever-evolving human government encompassing hundreds of star systems, messy, bureaucratic, and always teetering on the edge of internal conflict. Interest in what? Selling me as a curiosity to the highest bidder? The agent merely smiled. You misunderstand. You've demonstrated a unique talent for navigating the Qintari threat. Your survival is more valuable than credits. We have a proposition. Over the next hour, he outlined the plan. She'd receive protection in exchange for returning to Qintari space, not as a smuggler, but as an envoy. A pawn, she thought bitterly, in some high-stakes political game she barely understood. But the potential, it was undeniable. If there was even a sliver of a chance to make the Qintari see humans as something other than monsters, to open a dialogue, could she afford to ignore it? The weight of the decision pressed down upon her. She'd always been a survivor, looking out for herself on the fringes. But this was something bigger, a terrifying leap of faith into a future she couldn't even begin to envision. In the end, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. I'll do it, she said, her voice hoarse, "but I'm playing this my way." The agent's smile widened. "That's precisely what makes you so valuable, Captain Lin." Sarah's training was a whirlwind of intensity she'd never experienced before. Tutors drilled her mercilessly on Qintari history, language, even their complex social etiquette. The physical training was no less demanding, with government specialists enhancing her reflexes and tactical understanding. The goal? To make her as formidable as possible, both in negotiation and in case those negotiations went sideways. Yet the most valuable lessons came from an unlikely source, a stooped, elderly woman named Anya, her skin weathered and lined with the stories of a life lived across the stars. "They'll test you, girl," Anya rasped one evening, her gaze unsettlingly perceptive. "Not just your strength, but your heart. You'll see what they want you to see, the power, the order. Makes it easy to forget they bleed, just like us." The new ship they assigned her was sleek and intimidating, a far cry from the Firefly's patched-up charm. It was armed to the teeth, a concession to the dangers of Qintari space, but the gleaming hull felt wrong, too polished for the grimy reality awaiting her. Her cover story was meticulously crafted, a mid-level trader with just enough documentation and fabricated history to avoid immediate suspicion. Then came the hardest part, the target. "No one knows for sure," her handler admitted, the holoscreen flickering with blurry images of Qintari officers. Jantar was disciplined, but there are rumors the High Command wasn't entirely displeased by the outcome. Someone like that, if he still believes there's a chance for understanding, he'd be your best chance. Sarah's stomach twisted, her freedom, perhaps even her life, might hang on her encounter with Jantar turning into something more, something collaborative. It was a chilling gamble, a house of cards balanced on the fragile possibility that they might find common ground. Weeks turned into a blur of preparation and a simmering anxiety that made sleep a forgotten luxury. Finally, the day arrived, stowed in the modified ship's cargo hold, surrounded by trade goods to lend credence to her cover. Sarah was launched back towards the dangerous heart of Qintari territory. Fear gnawed at her, but a defiant spark remained. She wasn't just some smuggler anymore. Sarah Lin was on a mission, clutching a fragile strand of hope, and she'd be damned if she didn't use this unexpected chance to try and reshape her own destiny, and maybe even that of her entire species. The Qintari border stations were as imposing as she remembered, bristling with weapons platforms and the silent scrutiny of the guards. Yet this time, her papers held up. They waved her through with barely a cursory scan, proof that the Federation's influence extended even here. But that influence could only take her so far. The hardest part of her journey was just beginning. Navigating Qintari space with her false flag persona was a dangerous dance. Every word, every gesture was scrutinized. There were close calls, the sly information broker on a backwater planetoid who saw through her trader's facade a little too easily, the brusque patrol ship captain who seemed intent on a more thorough search of her vessel. Sarah kept her cover story intact, just barely, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and the haunting words of her old tutor. "You'll see what they want you to see." The Qintari frontier was a realm of contrasts. Imposing military installations floated alongside bustling trade hubs, the rigid structure of their society evident even in the layout of their star stations. News of her return seemed to outpace her ship, and whispers followed her once again. The human, the one they couldn't kill. Amidst the tension, Sarah sought the cracks, the anomalies. A lone Qintari historian on a research outpost, his face lined with weariness, who spoke of a forgotten treaty with a long-extinct race. A group of engineers engaged in a heated, coded debate in a station lounge, their rigid stances softening slightly with each sip of potent Qintari liquor. It was in these moments she glimpsed the truth behind Anya's words, the individuals beyond the monolithic image of the enemy. The hunt for Jantar was frustratingly slow. The Qintari military's internal communications were notoriously difficult to breach, and even with Federation assistance, it was like searching for a specific raindrop in a hurricane. Sarah, forced to play the waiting game, used the time to build tenuous connections, planning carefully worded questions, hints about the destructive nature of prolonged conflict and the burdens faced by isolated empires. Then came a breakthrough. A coded message, delivered through back channels so convoluted it was a testament to the Federation's intelligence network. Qintari had been posted to a remote research base. The facility, officially focused on early warning systems technology, was also strategically close to a cluster of minor systems, a potential staging ground for future Qintari expansion. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This was it, a chance to find her Qintari counterpart, and with him, perhaps find a receptive ear at the edge of their vast empire. Her journey to the research base was fraught with peril. Disguised as a shipment courier, she plotted a circuitous route, relying on old smuggler tricks and a hefty dose of luck. The base loomed before her ship like a predatory insect, all sharp lines and sensor arrays. Her hastily fabricated credentials granted her entry, though the scrutiny of the guards made her skin prickle. She was a hunted animal walking openly into the lion's den, and every second could be her last. Within the labyrinthine halls of the Qintari research base, Sarah felt disorientingly alone. This wasn't a vibrant space station with the cacophony of alien life. It was sterile, functional, the air thick with military discipline. The Qintari scientists and technicians she passed moved with silent efficiency, their multiple eyes barely registering her presence. Yet she sensed an undercurrent of tension, a subtle unease that echoed her own. Her contact had been frustratingly vague, a rendezvous point near the engineering sector, a time frame, and a cryptic phrase to signal her presence. Even the strongest alloy can weaken over time. It was a chilling reminder that within these walls, she wasn't just Sarah anymore. She was the personification of a long, brutal conflict, a reminder that even the formidable Qintari were not invulnerable. She found Qintari unexpectedly. Tracking a group of harried-looking technicians laden with equipment, Sarah ventured into a dimly lit maintenance corridor. That's when she saw him, his 8-foot form unmistakable even amidst the maze of pipes and conduits. He was alone, working with single-minded focus on a damaged control panel, his mandibles working soundlessly. This was no longer the grand cruiser or the formal meeting room. Here, stripped of formalities, he was both intimidating and strangely vulnerable. For a long moment she just watched, memories of their last encounter flashing before her eyes. Then, taking a deep breath, she spoke the code phrase. Qintari's reaction was instantaneous. He whirled, secondary eyelids snapping open in shock. They locked eyes, human and Qintari, prey and hunter, and somehow something else flickered within the multifaceted depths of his gaze, not outright aggression, but wariness, even a hint of begrudging recognition. "You are reckless, human," he rasped, his voice unnervingly quiet in the echoing corridor. "Returning here. And you are a fool if you think this endless war is the only path for your people," Sarah countered, surprised by her own boldness. "I came to talk, to listen. If you dare to do the same." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of machinery. Finally, Qintari inclined his head ever so slightly. "Not here. Follow." He led her deeper into the maze of the station, through security checkpoints he bypassed with curt commands, into a secluded observation room overlooking the vastness of space. It was a silent concession of trust, an acknowledgement that some conversations were simply too dangerous for even the most heavily monitored corridors. "Why come back?" Qintari's voice was a low rumble, edged with a tension that mirrored her own. "Because hiding doesn't stop wars," Sarah replied, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. "They taught me, just like they taught you, that the other side was the monster. But on that asteroid field, I saw a warrior, not a mindless beast. I saw someone who could change the narrative." The words hung heavy in the air, then, slowly, tentatively, they began to speak. War turned into tactics, propaganda into cultural misunderstandings, fear into a strange, fragile thread of shared vulnerability. It was a dangerous, exhilarating dance, a battle of ideals fought not with weapons, but with the unwavering belief that somewhere beneath the fear and the hatred, there might lie a common ground. Their discussions became a clandestine ritual. Every few rotations, Sarah found a pretext to return to the research base, slipping into the shadows where Qintari waited. The risks were immense. Discovery would brand him a traitor, her an infiltrator. Yet, with each shared whisper, each cautious debate in the silent observation room, something extraordinary happened. They began to build an impossible bridge. It wasn't about grand proclamations or sudden alliances. It was the small, tentative revelations that chipped away at the foundations of hatred. Sarah, with her wry humor and stories of the vast, messy tapestry of humanity. Qintari, with his unwavering, and at times deeply frustrating, focus on order, and the quiet tales of those within Qintari ranks who longed for stability, not just conquest. One evening, amidst the diagrams of Qintari battle strategies and Sarah's hastily sketched maps of hidden trade routes, Qintari said something that shook her to the core. The stories, they are not wholly inaccurate. He hunched, the weight of centuries bearing down on him. There were outposts, rebellions. Long ago, our ancestors sought to quell dissent with brutality. That brutality, it became embedded in our understanding of outsiders. It was an admission, a sliver of vulnerability from the warrior who had first appeared unbreakable. Sarah saw with agonizing clarity how deeply the propaganda ran, how easily a twisted past could dictate a brutal present. She told him then about Earth's own blood-stained history, the wars waged in the name of fear, the peace born from the ashes, a cycle as old as humanity itself. Yet, there was another twist to their ever-evolving dynamic. The more they spoke, the more Sarah realized Qintari was not the enemy she'd braced herself to confront. He was the system itself, the embodiment of a militaristic society that had fed on war for far too long. This wasn't about convincing a single Qintari. This was about trying to plant the seeds of doubt into the unyielding bedrock of their very culture. Their conversations grew bolder, their plans more dangerous. Using the Federation back channel, Sarah began feeding carefully targeted bits of misinformation to her superiors. Inflated troop movements, hints of internal strife within the Qintari ranks. Each deception, however small, was a stone they cast at the rigid structure, a way to buy time, to create the illusion of vulnerability, of a colossal empire starting to crack. The day everything threatened to collapse arrived without warning. A transmission, intercepted by Federation agents, crackled to life in Sarah's cramped ship cockpit. It was a high-ranking Qintari commander, his fury chilling even across the vastness of space. Qintari had been found out. The message wasn't just a death sentence for Qintari. It was a blow to Sarah's desperate, fragile hopes. The time of whispered theories and carefully crafted lies was over. Now, it was a desperate gamble for survival. Instinct screamed at Sarah to run, to disappear into the labyrinthine depths of human-controlled territories. But there was a flicker of defiance within her, fueled by the image of Qintari standing tall, defying centuries of instilled hatred. He'd taken a risk for her, for the mere possibility of change. Now it was her turn, whatever the cost. Her transmission to the research base was blunt, coded only enough to alert her ally. The trap is sprung. Evacuate. She then jammed the Qintari comms, a desperate act of defiance buying them precious minutes, perhaps even hours. Sarah's ship tore away from the Qintari facility, alarm lights blazing throughout her once anonymous vessel. No longer a traitor with a forged past, she was an exposed nerve, an open act of rebellion. Pursuit was inevitable, and this time there'd be no asteroids to shield her flight. Her plan, if you could even call it such, was born of necessity. The Qintari were predictable in their ruthlessness. They would intercept her before she reached any Federation support, a swift and brutal example meant to quell further dissent. Sarah instead charted a course deeper into Qintari space, aiming for a system known for its high concentration of asteroid fields and unstable planetoids, a potential sanctuary or a deadly, inescapable tomb. When the Qintari warships screeched out of hyperspace, their weapons primed, she was ready. With reckless abandon, Sarah hurled her ship into the heart of the asteroid field, trusting her old smuggler's skills to guide her through a space where the hulking Qintari vessels would be dangerously outmaneuvered. Debris exploded around her, the relentless barrage from her pursuers echoing through the hull. There was nowhere to run, just a maddening game of outflying the inevitable. It was Qintari's transmission that finally shattered the relentless pursuit. His voice, usually measured, now crackled with a desperation that matched her own. "Belay that attack. Prisoner exchange. I will come willingly." It was a blatant bluff, an attempt to buy her time and possibly his own death knell. Confusion rippled through the Qintari squadron. Sarah seized the opportunity, firing her last remaining decoy flares and vanishing into the depths of the asteroid field. It was a temporary reprieve, not a victory, but she had a destination now, a rendezvous point coded into Qintar's final defiant message. Ahead lay a desolate planetoid, known only to smugglers and those desperate enough to seek refuge in its hidden caverns. Sarah set her battered ship down, the sense of impending doom a lead weight in her chest. Would Qintar even make it out alive? Had she sacrificed him for a fool's errand, a dream of peace shattered in the cold depths of space? The weight on the desolate planetoid was an agonizing exercise in patience and rising despair. Sarah busied herself performing makeshift repairs on her damaged ship, every echoing clang of metal on metal feeling like a countdown to an unavoidable confrontation. She had no way of knowing if Qintar's sacrifice had bought her enough time or if the Qintari, realizing the bluff, were ruthlessly scouring every asteroid in their relentless search. Each flicker of an incoming transmission sent her pulse pounding in her ears. Capture, or worse. Yet the silence stretched, broken only by the desolate whine of the planetoid's relentless winds. Was this how hope died? Not with an explosion, but in a desolate corner of space, fading into a numbing sense of inevitability. Then it came. A weak signal, barely breaking through the planetoid's atmospheric interference. It was an unfamiliar frequency, an antique band likely abandoned centuries ago for more secure channels. Desperation outweighed caution. Sarah patched into the ancient feed. Qintar's voice crackled to life, distorted but unmistakably resolute. He wasn't alone. With him were others, the hushed tones and coded phrases hinting at a network far larger than Sarah had dared imagine. "The seeds! They have sprouted," Qintar declared, the relief in his voice tinged with wonder. "There are those who see the path you've shown, human." Sarah felt a surge of disbelief battling against a rising tide of hope. She hadn't imagined it. Those late-night whispers, the shared vulnerability, had ignited something far larger. Qintar continued, detailing a daring plan. One of their allies had secured temporary access to a heavily guarded Qintari communication relay. They would broadcast a different message, one to their own people, not the usual propaganda, but a call for questioning, for open dialogue between factions long concealed from each other. It was a long shot, fraught with the potential for unimaginable repercussions. Yet, in their voices, Sarah heard the echo of her initial defiant broadcast from the asteroid field, the audacity born of desperation, the last stand transformed into a flicker of revolution. Sarah's role was clear. She was the outsider, the symbol the Qintari hardliners would rally against. Her escape and the implied alliance would make her the perfect scapegoat, fueling the fires of aggression. The broadcast could be twisted, used to solidify the old narrative, to shut down the voices of reason with overwhelming force. But with sacrifice came opportunity. While the Qintari focused their rage on her, the true message might spread unseen, undermining the foundations of their rigid control from the inside out. The rendezvous point was the furthest edge of Federation space, a daring gamble that she barely made it there alive. The Qintari pursuit, predictably brutal and fueled by outrage, nearly caught her at the border. Yet, Federation ships scrambled, forming a tenuous shield, an overt act of protection that might well ignite into an open war. Sarah landed as the first Qintari warship screeched into view, the tension a palpable, explosive force rippling through the vastness of space. What followed was a standoff filled with accusations, barely veiled threats, and the chilling realization that she, Sarah Lynn, one-time smuggler and sole survivor, was at the heart of a conflict that might change the galaxy forever.